A secular state has no authority to redefine the fundamental laws of marriage. 13 August, 2025 Anno Domini. Official publication of the Holy Apostolic See of Rome, in exile, by His Holiness Pope Jacobus I, on the subject of the sacrilegious intrusion and outright criminal usurpation, by the worldwide secular powers of the state, of the supreme teaching authority, the keys to the kingdom of heaven given by Christ our Lord to His true Roman Catholic Church, to His rightful and true Sovereign Pontiff, to safeguard and faithfully protect the divine laws of faith and morals, and to properly and justly govern the true Catholic Church, and how the present time apostasy of this wicked and godless world, in these abominable self-indulgent perverse attempts to override this divinely given authority of the Church, tries to justify the today so prevalent sodomite perversions, and how the secular atheistic state criminally disregards the divinely imposed constraints of the divine and natural laws of marriage, which, to define and obey these constraints, is by the Catholic Church's definition possible solely and only between a naturally born man and a naturally born woman, within the constraints of the Church law, the 1917 Code of Canon Law, which law safeguards the sanctity of this divinely instituted Sacrament of Holy Matrimony, which law and this true Catholic Church's authority, the secular states criminally violate and disregard, and the severe wrath of God, in His punishing and scripturally recorded consequences, will follow.
Today we have prepared a different kind of publication, although it coincides with our authority as it is. And it is very important publication because of the circumstances that are in this world, how people are and how the secular government of people who usurp to themselves authority to dictate matters of Catholic faith and morals, or subvert it to the point of their own versions of what the human life should look like, which is contrary to the divine law and the authority of the Church. How they usurp this authority in order to, or elect themselves to decide these matters as if they were authorized to do so, and they lack the authority of passing judgment. And that's why the title is like this, because precisely this is happening, and we have to once again raise our voice as rightful and true Sovereign Pontiff to condemn the whole intrusion as absolutely detrimental to the salvation of souls, and absolutely abominable sacrilegious usurpation of the secular government of the authority that solely and only by divine right belongs to the Holy Mother Church, the true Catholic Church, outside of which there is no salvation. We have prepared this here. That's from the Syllabus of Errors of our predecessor, that's made by Pius the Ninth, and it deals with, we have used this before, but just for the beginning of this publication is essential because it is illustrative of the authority of the Church, as it is showing really the defects that were so prevalent and intruding even back then, at time when this was published, the Syllabus of Errors, which was roughly in the middle of, or at least 1860s. So in regards to this all condemned propositions that Pius IX condemned, every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, led by the light of reason, he may have thought true, which includes also that every man is, and the proposition as it is, every man is free to be an atheist, or believe as they see fit in the spiritual sense, or whatever sense they figure out themselves. And in that case, that's part of this, it is condemned, because that's not true in front of God. And then the next, which is underlined, then man may, in the practice of any religion, whatever, find the path of eternal salvation and attain eternal salvation, which is another really impossibility as it is, but unfortunately that's the way this world has chosen to be. And obviously, that is not true either. That's why it's condemned by the Church, by the papal authority of our presses. At least good hopes, the next one, should be entertained concerning the salvation of those who, in no respect, live in the true Church of Christ, which is the Roman Catholic Church, divine institution, true Roman Catholic Church, not the Domicile sect or the heretical assemblies. And the next one, Protestantism is nothing else than a different form of the same Christian religion, in which it is permitted to please God equally as in the true Catholic Church. And that is condemned, obviously, because that's not true. So then we go to the next one, which is extremely important as it is, because these are notations of importance that follow in regards to the extent of the intrusion of the forces of evil, of the devil, against the Holy Mother Church. And they are recorded in this, and we can read in the book, First Circuit Deception, KGB defector until legalism, was analyst of the KGB and knew about all this, participated in high-level meetings back then before he defected. But the long-term plan of Russian communists was in preparatory stages in 1950s and early 1960s before he defected. And the long-term plan that is being executed and that we are seeing in this as it is, the consequences. First is the introduction of non-Catholic sect that is full of communist elements, that is proposing this false religion, lacking the authority, and subverting souls of many. And that's the work of this KGB directorate tasked with active measures against religion that the Russians introduced and during those times to pervert and all this. But it is the idea of the chairman of the Italian Communist Party, Antonio Gramsci, who was familiar with all this. So please observe what it says. Antonio Gramsci explains very well the Russian communist strategy to subvert the church and to destroy her. As part of the program to destroy religion from within, the KGB in the late 1950s started sending dedicated young communists to ecclesiastical academies and seminaries to train them as future church leaders. Of course, this is from what he knew, but the idea and this strategy was introduced a lot sooner than 1950s, obviously. But it must have been extensively executed back then and that time, but it was used much more before in the beginning because that was actually the idea came also from Lenin and was taken up by Stalin and then it continues developing and all this. But Gramsci was very much involved in all this, the perversion of the church. Then there's what Gorbachev said, there must be no let up in war against religion. We have this in the next slide, we will speak of that, so we'll skip this. With his wife Raisa, Gorbachev is a disciple of the late Sardinian communist Antonio Gramsci, the Marxist proponent of a policy of active social demoralization, attack against morality, and the Marxization of religion. Gramsci taught that Stalinist repression is an inefficient means of achieving irreversible political control. A more effective method would be to pervert the approach of the Roman Catholic Church with which Gramsci was familiar, namely to seek control through the position of the minds of the people. That means subverting the educational process, subverting the morality through media, through entertainment, through all these influences, and through the sections of government that they introduce these laws that completely contradict the church laws and divine laws and laws, the natural laws as they are, and completely destroy the safeguards that exist prior to that, or did exist prior, and do exist in the church, obviously. Position of the minds of the people. Thus, religion must be destroyed and worship of God of one man replaced by the worship of man to help man establish his home on earth. This is so striking, but it is truly the way that these people have concocted this. So this is from the speech of the 1987 speech, the Communist Archpriest Mikhail Gorbachev to the Soviet military forces in Uzbekistan. The attack against religion is at the core of the revolution. They must be held up in a war against religion, because as long as a religion exists, communism cannot prevail. We must intensify the obliteration of all religions wherever they are being practiced and taught. This in itself, if the leaders of countries that accepted Gorbachev or were at the time dealing with him in a way, understood that the manifold depth of this horrifying statement, choice, diabolically introduced statement of his, the position, the strategy as they had, they would have never get involved with him and never trusted him to begin with, and the Russian communists would be not anywhere near what they are today. And it's very time fitting because of the negotiations with them and all kinds of agreements and all this with communist, atheistic enemies of God is totally abominable and has been condemned by the church, and we obviously raise our voice in that same direction to condemn these kind of approaches of the secular governments, because they are actually detrimental of the protection that the state would otherwise have to make advances and agreements and cooperation with communist, atheistic criminals who do not possess validly the authority of the state and should have never been recognized, and such recognition is thus invalid as it is of their governments, because they were obtained by injustice and terrorist approach. And in regards to Russia, there was bloody revolution 1917, overthrow of the legitimate government as it is, and before that overthrow of monarchy, all this, but overthrow of the government, that of itself should have never been recognized, and as far as any recognition of such a government is in itself invalid, because authority comes from God, all authority comes from God. To recognize a government that is using means of terror, murder, oppression, tyranny, atheistic, militant denial of the rightful and true religion of God, that is Catholic tradition, and attacks and persecution, horrible persecution of the church. Any government that recognizes such system of government as legitimate is likewise guilty of the consequences and the fruits of this atheistic communist usurped, obviously, form of government as it is. And the history of communism proves it. So to deal with such people who have never repented, never converted, there was never real collapse of communism as it is, and what they promised at that time, like Gorbachev did, in contrast to this kind of statement, it illustrates that such people must never be trusted, and the church has always held that position. That doctrine was always proclaimed by our predecessors. You can read Divini Redemptoris, encyclical letter of our predecessor, blessed memory, Pius XI, condemnation of the atheistic communism, and that says explicitly, although the perversion itself, the Novus Ordo sect has on its website today a version that is absolutely unacceptable, because they were phrases removed or altered, so they cannot be trusted and must never be trusted. So we go to next. That is the usurper who does not belong to, who has communist connections. This impostor Bergoglio, who's paying for his evils and apostasy in hell today because they cannot absolve themselves. So we don't like to show this picture because of him dressed in white cassock. Otherwise, it's very fitting because he stands next to KGB Lieutenant Colonel Putin, who is a communist criminal And no matter how many times Putin proclaims himself that he has given up and all this, and moreover, he believes, based on his statements and deeds, what he has done, invading sovereign country like Ukraine and causing deaths and all kinds of things, and authorized murders of his opponents and so forth, and there's no freedom in Russia. That has never happened, and communists were never punished for their crimes, because this is criminal mafia. So to have such person in the Vatican, the true Pope would never permit. And the sort of sect does not have authority to elect the Pope, so there's not much to say. So this is a picture of a publication that recently appeared, and we will address this in more thorough manner because of this attack on morality in context, as we have spoken about. It is very important to observe what these people are publishing and why is it so that the church is thus attacked by these enemies of the church, and even this kind of approach is insufficient. And moreover, no secular court has authority to override fundamental or define fundamental laws of marriage. That's impossible. So, as the title can say, you can see plainly what is about. It's the sodomite perversion that is absolutely horrifying abomination condemned by God in divine law. We will not go through all this because that is a matter of Holy Scripture. We have already addressed this in previous publications. There's no need. This publication is about the non-existent authority of the secular justice system to override the existing order and the teaching of the church, because this is a matter of faith, Catholic faith and morals, and therefore no true Catholic can possibly accept any such rulings and any such opinions, which are all thus heretical, because it touches on matters of revealed faith. Our Lord speaks about this in the Holy Scripture, but that's all matter of already doctrine that was published, so we don't need to go through all this. And God has condemned, and St. Paul speaks about this, and St. Jude in his epistle and so forth. So this is nothing that is not already addressed in the Holy Scripture. The Church has spoken about this. And but it is the matter how they approach this question of the sodomite unions, which are not marriages at all, and can never be called marriages. That would be a heresy. An abomination, violation of divine law, as it is. And so we go to this first. For the first time since we quote from this. For the first time since 2015, the Supreme Court has been asked to overturn a landmark ruling on same-sex unions as this, which is not marriage. So it will happen in this fall. Kim Davis, the Christian Kentucky clerk who went to jail for refusing to issue a same-sex license in 2015, filed the petition and argued the High Court decision in Obergefell versus Hodges was egregiously wrong. And it was reported 10 years after the Supreme Court extended there's no such right. It doesn't exist in front of God. It's just not. The Supreme Court does not have authority to override this. What exists, what is part of the real faith, and by this, the Supreme Court violated the constraints that exist, the divine law, natural law of God, and therefore the authority of the Church, because that belongs to the Holy Mother Church to decide, and that has been decided, and that will never be overturned and never be altered. So Supreme Court lacks the authority to pass judgment on this, to redefine any of this at all, and granted to sodomite perverts this the status of a marriage, a marital status, to sodomite perverts who have disregarded the divine law as it is. And Supreme Court has no authority to pass judgment on this, what is established as it is. By this kind of usurpation of the authority of Holy Mother Church, the Supreme Court has truly violated the rights of the Church, and has been going on for 10 years, as it says. now they're trying to take it up, and they don't have that authority. All they have to do is remedy the problem, which is to completely annul the existing non-binding law at all. The problem with all this is because that's the Supreme Court, and that means that they have authority to pass judgment on these secular matters. They're using the secular authority to attack the religion that is the true religion, that means the Catholic tradition, and preserve the authority of the Church. And that's what is serious about this, because in this case, it is truly religious persecution and tyranny as it is, because on those grounds, people who are involved in this sodomite perversion can then go against the Church and or argue in court or file lawsuits against people who hold this. And the proof is that what happened to this local government official or clerk. So that is the proof that the times are so evil. There's no less proof than this. This is not only as a perversion, but government-sanctioned sodomite perversion, as it is. And they don't possess that protection because divine law overrides it and provides for that it would never happen. It violates the law of God and natural law of God, as it is. And therefore the authority of the Church, that is the true Catholic Church, not the opposite sect. They are in fact promoting this sodomite perversion as it is, and these kind of unions, or accepting them as it is. So it says, 10 years after the Supreme Court extended the rights to same-sex or whatever, nationwide, the justices this fall will consider for the first time whether to take up a case that explicitly asks them to overturn that decision. The next slide. So it says, Kim Davis, the former Kentucky county clerk who was jailed for 6 days in 2015 after refusing to issue a marriage license to a gay couple on religious grounds, is appealing a $100,000 jury verdict for emotional damages plus $260,000 for attorney fees. In a petition for writ of certiorari filed last month, Davis argued First Amendment protection for free exercise of religion immunizes her from personal liability for the denial of marriage licenses. More fundamentally, she claims the High Court decision in Obergefell versus Hodges extending marriage rights to same-sex couples under the 14th Amendment's due process protections was egregiously wrong. And why is it so? Because protection of the law does not extend to people who transgress the law of God. And divine law stands above that of secular law. To disregard this is to truly override the authority that exists by the institution in the world, as it is authority that's granted by God. All authority comes from God. And therefore that in itself is an intrusion, or actually installment of tyranny, as it is, into the world. Because in that case the door is open and the church authority is a choice set aside as marginal, as almost non-existent, and then it is a religious persecution, because then it establishes not only precedent, but it elevates the secular authority above that authority of the church, which is not only condemned. And we could use for example, Syllabus of Error speaks about it, Pastor 9, our Professor of Memory speaks about this, but in this case, it is illustrative of showing the progress of this religious indifferentism and Lithuanianism, and that progresses to the point of showing denial of the authority of the church at the expense of self, or at the onset of the secular authority that is and wrongly, and in sacrilege, usurping the authority of the church, and the secular authority does not have that authority to pass judgment on us, and to make it into a secular law. In Isaiah, in chapter 10, the book of Isaiah, it speaks about it. Woe to them that write wicked laws, and write them write injustice. Of course, people who are already godless and who have used these excuses as to elevate certain part of the population that is practicing this abomination to the same status and call it freedom or equal protection is absolutely unacceptable, because there's no such thing as equal protection of people who violate the law of God and create abomination and truly perversion of the highest order. To grant them what at least what was always held, obviously, and what the church insists upon, the same status of marriage as those who are following the law of God. That means naturally born man and naturally born woman. And of course, we will not go into the details what the church law or canon law in regards to Sacrament of Holy Matrimony and all this, because that's not part of this publication. But to elevate these people to that position is not only, we have said already, usurpation of the authority of the church, but religious persecution, because that it also contains the aftermath if this is rejected, as can be seen in the case of this county clerk. Obviously, that's horrendous, but that's the way they insist. And this is not only related to United States alone. This is a worldwide phenomenon. This is something that is happening worldwide. That means the attack against the morality, the communist infiltration of the governments. This is introduced by people who don't believe in God, don't have any respect for the authority of the church, and more likely are communist agents or people who have no regard for the truth at all and divine law. None. Because otherwise they will fear God's punishment if they go that far. So recall that the late great Justice Scalia dissented to the Supreme Court's decision on gay marriage in 2015 and called the ruling a threat to American democracy. And then it continues in to go to the next slide. So then page 3, and it says, the law can recognize as marriage whatever sexual attachment and living arrangements it wishes. That's not true. That's why we are publishing this, because this is absolutely not true. That recognition doesn't exist under no pretext whatsoever. So it says, favorable civil consequences from tax treatment to rights of inheritance. Those civil consequences, public approval that conferring the name of marriage evidences can perhaps have adverse social effects, but no more adverse than the effect of many other controversial laws. So it is not of special importance to me that's what the clerk writes, or what the law says about marriage. It is of overwhelming importance, however, who it is that rules me. But that's not the point. It's the question of authority that in this case does not exist. There's no such authority vested in secular authority of the court, no matter how high that court is in the world, to override the fundamental laws of marriage. That's impossible. And we condemn by apostolic authority these kind of reasoning, these kind of false doctrines as detrimental and absolutely abominable, sacrilegious, and prescribe them with the fullness of our apostolic authority and power of our office. No person, and there are very few who are true Catholics, no person today who strives to become true Catholic can absolutely adhere to this false doctrine as it is. We will not accept any converts and on this ground if they espouse something like this. That's impossible. That has to be held absolutely. There's no This is not open to discussion. This is not open to any negotiation, or, God forbid, people will attempt to pass judgment on this our today teaching and doctrine, because in that case they are on their own. We will not permit any such thing. That's impossible. The authority of the magisterial authority of the Church stands, and that is not open to discussion. This is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of doctrine, infallible doctrine of the rightful and true Sovereign Pontiff. So then it continues. This right. Today's decree says that my rule and the rule of 320 million Americans coast to coast is a majority of the 9 lawyers on the Supreme Court. The opinion in these cases is the furthest extension, in fact, and the furthest extension one can even imagine of the court's claimed power to create liberties that the Constitution and its amendment neglect to mention. This is not a matter to open door to pass judgment. There's nothing in this letter, and this person claims to be Christian, and this letter to say that this is this 11 pages, that this is against the law of God, and that the law of God is the ruling power and ruling law of every God-loving, God-fearing society and country. And if that is not so, then a country is on the way to destruction, and God's wrath will follow. The example of what God did as punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah and the relating villages that was affected also is self-evident and recorded in the Holy Scripture. So this is not some small matter. This practice of constitutional revision by an unelected committee of 9, always accompanied, as it is today, by extravagant praise of liberty, robs the people of the most important liberty they asserted in the Declaration of Independence and won in the Revolution of 1776, the freedom to govern themselves. Again, this is not the point. This is absolutely misleading, and again, it's not the fundamental part that needs to be asserted. When the law of God is violated, there's no such authority that exists that can do so. And in the world, no such authority exists to violate the law of God. And the authority of the Church to declare this as it is. Because we are a divine institution, Roman Catholic Church, and therefore guided by the power of the Holy Ghost, what we declare is therefore infallible in matters of faith and morals, and church government is as it is in pertains and in disregard in morality and magisterial power of our office stands against this, and it's absolutely irrevocable, and it cannot be overridden, period. So then it says, until the courts put a stop to it, public debate over same-sex marriage, same-sex union, forgotten to scratch that, marriage, displayed American democracy at its best. Of course not. There's no such thing. It's not part of any liberty. It's to acknowledge this perversion, sodomite perversion of something that is open to discussion, when it violates the law of God and God forbids that to be done, is in itself disregarding the law itself, the divine law and natural law of God as it is. And therefore, this is not open to debate at all, and can never be part of public debate, because there's lacking authority to do so. The law is established, it exists, it cannot be changed, because that's how God created human souls, human beings, human bodies. We did this intention to procreate, and not only to procreate, but to procreate in order to produce more souls to God, so that God can be honored, worshipped, and the soul can be saved after the fall of Adam. That is obviously and God foreseeing that, and that's not part of this our publication, but that's evident that God foreseeing that the fall of Adam as it is, the sin of Adam, have foretold how this will be done, obviously, and how that is dealt with. The law of God stands. And so, from the beginning, says our Lord, God created male and female, and that's it. So that's that's the marriage. That's the definition of marriage between naturally born man and naturally born woman, with no alteration to the sexual status as it is, which these abominable new practices are inventing themselves on this world as it is, which is absolutely horrendous. What we have, this is absolutely unheard of, that people would actually seek something like this. Not that they would actually go through all this, but they seek it, which is a horrendous abomination as it is. So we'll go further. Americans considered the arguments and put the question to, well, absolutely impossible. Again, this is not something that is not possible. The electorates of 11 states, either directly or through their representatives, chose to expand the traditional definition of marriage, which is not possible to be done. We have already spoken about it. We will not go through all this because it's just something that they will pay for it to God. Then it's this paragraph right here, the different color. The Constitution places some constraints on self-rule, constraints adopted by the people themselves when they ratify the Constitution and its amendments, forbidding our laws, impairing the obligation, prohibiting the free exercise of religion, which that's not the point, and that's this insufficiency in itself in the U.S. Constitution and worldwide constitutions as it is the true aftermath of the progress of not only the Protestant revolt, but the whole free-thinking movement as it is, the philosophers of the 19th century or 18th century and so forth onward, which the Church had dealt with and condemned. That's why the syllabus of errors of our predecessor, blessed memory Pius IX, is so important, because it deals with these causes and new inventions that the Church has condemned, obviously. So that aside from these limitations, it says those powers reserved to the states respectively or to the people can be exercised as the states or the people desire. Again, but not contrary to divine law and law of the Church, obviously. If the country and the state itself is not Catholic or anti-Catholic, the Catholics either should not live there, and that's, we speak in general terms, not what the situation is today, obviously, because there's no such thing as Catholic country today, obviously. Truly Catholic country in a sense. Well, they claim to be, that's a different matter, but they belong to the nobles of the sect, so they don't belong with the Catholic Church, and they don't practice the Catholic faith, and the fundamental points of the Catholic religion are not represented in the laws of that country as it is, and we don't really truly. It's not part of the scope of this our publication today to go through all this as it is. These cases, it says, ask us to decide whether the 14th Amendment contains a limitation that requires the states to license and recognize marriages between two people of the same sex. Does it remove that issue from the political process? No such political process, again, exists. That's why it's important to address this. No such political process is permissible to begin with. Just because people sit in one large room and claim the authority of legislature and then vote on these laws that attach themselves to the either acceptance of immorality or abomination as it is of the sodomite perversion, then they don't lack the authority to do so, because by doing so they violate the prohibition that exists on the free exercise of religion, because then it was constrained. No matter what they attach to it, to their law, that there's exclusion and all this, that the door is open and the country is on the precipice to disappear, to be punished severely by God. because the history of the Holy Scriptures is because that what we're trying to say is when a country allows itself to go through this process and liberate itself from the constraints of divine and natural law of God in this sense and in this aspect, then the country is saying to God that this country does not accept the law, the divine law of God, as binding, and then the country is free to do as the country pleases. Such freedom doesn't exist. That's a slavery of Satan and nothing less. And of course, the devil has much to do with this. Obviously, it is absolutely incredible that people actually have the audacity to claim to claim the name of Christian, which they don't possess, obviously, and to allow themselves to justify their opinion, which is heretical to begin with, as if this was something that the people have somehow obtained, or that somehow could be called inherent in the existence of the country, and that came by the establishment of the country itself, or the government of the country, and so forth, that somehow that is included in that what the country possesses in terms of the governmental power, political power, and all this. And it doesn't, and never have. And anyone who claims otherwise is therefore guilty of sacrilege. Such freedom doesn't exist. Such authority doesn't exist. You cannot override in the government as it is, by government, just because the government assembles to consider questions of political nature. That government does not, or that legislative power of the state does not have the authority to override the law of God. That doesn't exist, and it's absolutely null and utterly void from the onset, from the beginning. And that's why such laws are not binding and must be rejected by those who claim to be Catholic. Because of the lack of authority, the government doesn't possess that authority to do so, period. Then it continues, but we need not speculate. When the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, every state limited marriage to one man and one woman, and no one doubted the constitutionality of doing so. That resolves these cases. When it comes to determining the meaning of a vague constitutional provision, such as due process of law or equal protection of the laws, it is unquestionable that the people who ratified that provision did not understand it to prohibit a practice that remained both universal and uncontroversial in the years after ratification. We don't really assert what that should leave us with, what this statement actually says, because it is so ambiguous, the terms, that it could open both ways, as it asserts this last sentence, because just because it is widely accepted, such behavior as it is, does not mean that it is acceptable in law. That's because then the state becomes tyranny, obviously. If it becomes acceptable in law, then it's binding in conscience of those who live in that country. And so then any opposition to it becomes criminal in the view of that government, obviously. But when that law violates the conscience of people, and moreover, more importantly, violates the law of God, in that case that law is not binding at all. And moreover, a government who attempts to do something like this ceases to possess that authority to do so, because that authority is abused to inflict injustice on the subjects of that government, on the citizens of that country. And that's what's very troubling, and it is truly worldwide today. This is not some small matter isolated to particular countries. This is worldwide. Then it continues, the point 12, that we have no basis for striking down a practice that is not expressly prohibited by the 14th Amendment text, and that bears the endorsement of a long tradition of open, widespread, and unchallenged use dating back to the Amendment's ratification. Since there is no doubt whatever that the people never decided to prohibit the limitation of marriage to opposite-sex couples, the public debate over same-sex marriage must be allowed to continue. No such thing exists. And that's what's fundamentally wrong and heretical, obviously. So this person cannot claim to be Christian because otherwise this person, that's a woman, lady, would understand not to write something like this. We don't know who wrote this. In fact, it sounds like a production of a person who is more endowed with jurisprudence or a lawyer, obviously. But this is absolutely, we condemn this, but it's underlined, we condemn this proposition as it is, as prescribed and absolutely opposed to the Catholic doctrine in regards to marriage, and therefore forbidden to accept by all those who will become truly Catholic or who are truly Catholic. So we condemn this proposition right here to underline. No such authority exists. We already spoken about this. We go to the next page. And so that's extremely important how this is addressed. Then we will skip that. But the court ends this debate in an opinion. There's no such debate, permissible, period. An opinion lacking even a thin veneer of law, buried beneath its mummeries and straining to be memorable passages of the opinion. That means eloquence of a heretical falsehood. We will rephrase it. Eloquence of heretical falsehood of the opinion is candid as a startling assertion. No matter what it was, the people ratified the 14th Amendment protects those rights that the judiciary, in its quote reasoned judgment, unquote, thinks the 14th Amendment ought to protect. That is so because the generations that wrote and ratified the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment did not presume to know the extent of freedom in all of its, and then skips over the dissenting dimensions. How eloquence in itself, eloquence of the diabolically possessed minds, is capable of producing these kind of phrases and these kind of opinions that are thoroughly detrimental to eternal salvation of souls, destructive of that chance. Obviously, this is a horrible heresy. So obviously, yes, that's not possible to reason this way. And it's absolutely complete exclusion of, because this is not subject to reason, this is subject to divine law. Human reason cannot override divine law, has in fact no authority to override divine law. The established divine law dictates to human souls how to live the life in order to save one's soul, and that to impose, if those particular people reject the law of God, but do not intrude in the matters that the Church established for those who follow the Church law and divine law and are truly Catholic. That's so be it. They want to burn in hell, that's their choice. We mourn their positions, and we do not wish for them to go to hell, but that's their choice and free will. But when it entails use of secular authority for that purpose, that is different matter. In that case, they're imposing that secular authority on those who follow the law of God. And in that case, that is creating religious persecution and government tyranny, and violation of the liberty of conscience, and most importantly, attack on the authority of the Church, which we have quoted, but it comes from the Communist Party, Antonio Gramsci, all this. That is all orchestrated for that purpose, to establish the worldwide reign of the atheistic communist tyranny. That means the reign of the Antichrist, which is recorded in Holy Scripture how that is, and so forth. So we continue. One would think that sentence would continue, and therefore they provide for a means by which the people could amend the Constitution, or perhaps, and therefore they left the creation of additional liberties, such as the freedom to marry someone of the same sex, to the people, though the never-ending process of legislation. But then it says, but no, what logically follows is the majority's judge-empowering estimation is, and so they entrusted the future generations a charter protecting the right of all persons to enjoy liberty as we learn its meaning. It's the usurpation of the term, or the position, or the status of the authority of arbiter in these matters. That's what's serious. And that does not belong to the secular government to do. And that's the aftermath of the Protestant revolt and decline to accept the authority of the Church. That is divine institution, Roman Catholic Church, and therefore the authority of God. A rejection of the same is therefore embedded in this kind of publications. And it's self-evident that they don't have any intention to follow what the Church teaches, though what the Church declares on the subject. And to obey the Church is something that these people have rejected a long time ago, and were brought up in that heretical and sacrilegious mindset as it is, because they on premise reject the authority of the Church. Therefore they are themselves slaves of that false doctrine and false opinion, heretical opinion, which they espouse. And therefore for them it's a matter of public debate, which this is not open to public debate. This is a law of God that is and stands unchanged and is not, it's surely not, this is not open to not only even deliberation or anything like that, but this is not open to compromises and introduction of opinions that could sort of introduce more open doors and more broader really explanation of that law of God as it is. And obviously that does not belong to secular government, and never will, and never had. That is the domain of the Church, and the Church will never open this door, because that's impossible. That's explicitly taught, and that the laws of marriage exist, and that are recorded in the Canon Law, 1917 Code of Canon Law, and that's where it stands. And like we said, we don't address this in the aspect of what it needs to be, but what it must be upheld, and the lack of authority the secular government possesses to try to override this. Then it continues: history and tradition guide and discipline or inquiry, but do not set its outer boundaries. Thus, rather than focusing on the people's understanding of liberty, quote unquote, at the time of ratification or even today, the majority focuses on four principles and traditions that, in the majority's view, prohibit states from defining marriage as an institution consisting of one man and one woman. And we have written abominations of desolation and an evident sacrilege as it is, because no such authority exists to deliberate on the matters of divine law and natural law, which is established by God and cannot be changed. And that's why these people will pay to God for all this as it is. The next page is: this is a naked judicial claim to legislative, indeed super-legislative power, a claim fundamentally at odds with our system of government. Again, as much as we sympathize with these people who are trying to establish for themselves some kind of protective measures against the government overreach and government tyranny as it is, that's not a fundamental part of this question as it is, because nowhere near it says, which is the visual tragedy, we should call it, as it is, of our times, that people actually are incapable of realizing that this is more fundamental that meets the eye, that truly that it must be said that the law of God is violated by these governments, and that they have no such authority to do so on the grounds that they lack the authority because it's divine law and not legislative process they violate. That's the point. Except as limited by a constitutional prohibition agreed to by the people, the states are free to adopt whatever laws they like. Not so, that doesn't exist. No. Even those that offend the esteemed justice's reasoned judgment. System of government that makes the people subordinate to a committee of 9 elected lawyers does not deserve to be called a democracy. Again, the fundamental part of this is the disregard of the authority of the Church, and most importantly, the authority of God. And that's what is and will become the tragedy of a country that espouses this kind of reasoning. We have spoken to, go to the next page. We have spoken in this, and it is important to assert this, to address this. It's the mindset of a nation that is built on principles which the nation holds. And it's illustrative of this, really. When we consider what is the predominant building in countries that were formerly truly Catholic, in cities and villages and so forth, what was always the predominant building? And the answer is Catholic Church. It was always usually the tallest building, the tower, the bell tower, and all this, to illustrate that's how God rules the people and how they are subject to the church, and that's where they are protected. What is the predominant building in countries that are run by Protestant governments and Protestant mentality and so forth? In the United States, the answer is very easy. The predominant building of the town or a small town or a smaller city or whatever is the courthouse. That's the answer. And so that illustrates truly the mindset of a country as it is, because it's not the church that judges and these matters. And how the kings in times past of Catholic kingdoms understood that they are subject to the authority of the church in matters of faith and morals, and they cannot truly impose laws on their subjects that violate the law of God. They would never dare to do so because they would be excommunicated. For example, England in the time of Henry VIII. That's it. The excommunication came, and that's it. And people followed that, and they end up paying for it to God in hell, obviously. And it was in regards to marriage and usurpation of the authority of the church by the king himself, obviously, to justify nothing as disregard as it is. That would never be contemplated in times past, obviously. That's a peculiar development in these our evil times, as it is. The sodomite perversion, as it is, to empower it with the status that doesn't belong to it. But in this case, yes, it regards to divorce and all this, which is not something that is permissible under the law of God, obviously. So then it continues. But what really astounds is the hubris reflected in today's judicial putsch. The 5 justices who compose today's majority are entirely comfortable concluding that every state violated the Constitution for all of the 135 years between the 14th Amendment's ratification and Massachusetts permitting the same-sex unions as it is in 2003. They have discovered in the 14th Amendment a, quote, fundamental right, unquote, overlooked by every person alive at the time of ratification and almost everyone else in the time since. And they are certain that the people ratified the 14th Amendment to bestow on them the power to remove questions from the democratic process when that is called for by their reasoned judgment. These justices know, that's underlined right here, know that limiting marriage to one man and one woman is contrary to reason. That's what they're trying to establish. It's not to limit the marriage. It does not belong to the state to establish such laws. Period. Because in that case, they lose the authority to do so because that violates the law of God. And they cease to possess that authority because no person can accept this on the grounds that the state has the authority to write such laws that God imposes on human beings to follow. And that is what is very important here. And that's why these people are not even seeing it that way. And that's why we must condemn and raise our voice. I use our apostolic authority to condemn this. Because it is so fundamental that people have actually the audacity and truly lack of understanding in this sense, or disregard for the understanding as it is, or willful disregard of understanding, that this is something that they attempt to impose on their fellow human beings as an opinion that is, or somehow opening the door, to rephrase it, that somehow this is open to contradicting opinions, disregarding the law of God that establishes those boundaries once and for all, and they cannot be changed. And that is what is missing in these people, and that's why the punishment will be really accordingly from God, obviously. They know that an institution as old as government itself and accepted by every nation in history until 15 years ago. These justices know that limiting marriage to one man and one woman is contrary to reason. They know that an institution as old as government itself and accepted by every nation in history until 15 years ago cannot possibly be supported by anything other than ignorance or bigotry. And they are willing to say that any citizen who does not agree with that, who adheres to what was until 15 years ago the unanimous judgment of all generations and all societies, stands against the Constitution. Again, fundamentally wrong this is. Stands against the authority of God and His law. And when that is asserted, as it is, on the grounds of what it means, because there is no such separation of the law of God and law of the state. If there would be, that means that that state is no longer legitimate state as it is, because that becomes a tyranny. And we have explained this already. And so how is this possible that these people don't realize it? Because precisely that opening door is established, they establish it for themselves, disregard the authority of the church, and therefore they teach themselves to these kind of abominations and truly false doctrines and outright heretical, because then there's no protection at all. And anyone who has an opinion is thus free to assert it, and when that position gains foothold in the legislative power of the state, then in that case the protection ceases to be, in fact, and there's no constraints anymore, as it is evident by just reading these pages. It's self-evident that these people do not really wish to be protected in that sense. That's why they like to have it open for themselves, so that they could debate it themselves and voice their opinions. And that is obviously against the law of God and established order of God, and they will have to pay for it, and they will pay for it. So then it says the opinion, again, is couched in a style that is as pretentious as its content is egotistic. It is wanting to separate concurring or dissenting opinions to contain extravagances, even silly extravagances of thought and expression. It is something else for the official opinion of the court to do so. Well, that is, again, to vote on matters that entail divine law of God regards to marriage between human beings, to redefine them according to how the time progressed, is not only outright sacrilege, attack on God, but it's truly denial of the law of God as it is, and therefore disregard for the consequences, which are recorded in Holy Scripture, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously. And tempting God, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God as it is. That's evident that these people are actually doing the work of the devil and trying to lead others into that kind of reasoning, that kind of mindset that is therefore not only heretical, but it is truly attack on God as it is, as a mockery of God, because they say we will dare to override this because we think that we have the liberty to do so, and they don't realize that by doing so they become slaves of Satan, and truly enslaved in that false heretical doctrine they're trying to introduce or uphold. So that it is attempt to justify that opinion as it is, but not on the grounds that it must be done, that it is true violation of the law of God, and that no secular court has authority to do so. Because the opinions show profundities are often profoundly incoherent. The nature of marriage is that though its enduring bond, two persons together can find other freedoms such as expression, intimacy, and spirituality, and so forth. Really, whoever thought, we don't know where the person reads from that opinion, perhaps of the what was in that case. We gathered from the line because that was included in there. Can find other freedoms. So really, whoever thought that intimacy and spirituality, whatever that means, were freedoms. And if intimacy is, one would think freedom of intimacy is abridged rather than expanded by marriage. This is immaterial to the position, to the question as it is. This is not open to question. This is truly the fundamental part of the divine law that is violated by these kind of reasonings and attacked by them as it is. And that's what's serious about it. So on the next slide, we have one more after this. This is fundamental, truly, and it's tragic. It's a tragedy. This is tragedy, because times have progressed to this kind of perversion as it is. And it's truly abomination in front of God. It is truly so serious. So then it continues, this article or opinion of this person that was attacked by the secular authority. What possible, quote, essence, unquote, does substantive due process capture in an accurate and comprehensive way? It stands for nothing whatever except that those freedoms and entitlements that this court really likes. And the Equal Protection Clause, as employed today, identifies nothing except a difference in treatment that this court allows persons within the lawful realm to define and express their identity. I would hide my head in a bag. The Supreme Court of the United States has descended from disciplined legal reasoning and so forth to the mystical aphorism of the fortune cookie. This is an expression. We don't like to use these kind of frivolous statements, but we read from the text. But that's not the fundamental point of this, what needs to be, what it must be, obviously. That's why we have to address this, because that is lacking in these opinions, obviously. And it's insufficient. The secular power does not have the authority to decide this matter. That has been decided by divine law, and it stands on its own and cannot be subverted. And those who attempt to subvert it, they are guilty of sacrilege and will pay to God obviously in his wrath, what he will impose on them. And they will learn the hard way that this is not open to negotiation, and to impose this kind of abomination as it is on the citizens of a country is lowering their country to a level of tyranny. And that's why we have to address it, obviously. If the opinion is correct that the two clauses converge in the identification and definition of right, that's only because the majority likes and dislikes are predictably compatible. I could go on. The world does not expect logic and precision in poetry or inspirational pop philosophy. It demands them in the law. The stuff contained in today's opinion has to diminish this court's reputation for clear thinking and sober analysis. No, it is still against the law of God, natural law, and thus sacrilege. That's what we have there. So the last slide, and then we'll conclude. And this is only online. It is long, but it needs to be addressed. It has to be actually debated how long, and reluctantly we have done so, but it's our duty to speak on this subject. With each decision of ours that takes from the people a question properly left to them, no such thing exists. Now, this is not open to question. It's not open to deliberation in the matters of legislative debate or any kind of debate whatsoever. And that's why it is so serious that actually think that this is open. It is not. With each decision that is unabashedly based not on law but on the reasoned judgment of a bare majority of this court, we move one step closer to being reminded of our impotence. No, this is not being reminded of impotence. This is reminded of the law of God being violated. And we haven't included this, but we'll skip this as usual because recording is long. So then we have addressed this in a more really more way that needed to be addressed, precisely because to remain silent on the subject is we will have to fear God's punishment if we have done so. And obviously we have been instructed by His displeasure, as it is, that we have remained silent for way too long, because we have addressed this in our previous publications, but it needed to be addressed now because of the situation as it exists, and in the context that does exist, because the progress of that downslope of the human race as it is, as it truly is this world is turning into, is showing the times, and it truly is not only displeasing to us to watch this, to be witness to it, but that we have to deal with this kind of situation as absolutely unthinkable to happen in times past. The Pope had never had to address this in this sense. This is the first time that the Sovereign Pontiff has to address something that is fundamental part of the revealed religion, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition, revealed by God. And that's why these kind of laws are absolutely null as regards to rewriting the fundamental laws of marriage, rewriting them, redefining them by the state. They are not binding at all in conscience, and all those who are truly Catholic and strive to be truly Catholic must reject these things because they lead to hell. And they are truly subverting the faith, and because this Novus Ordo sect is espousing this, that's another additional proof that this Novus Ordo sect is not Catholic, obviously, and they are not Catholic because they profess non-Catholic religion. But those who recognize this sect and don't address this, they are all likewise the assemblies of heretics we have addressed before. They likewise are visible in this, that they do not wish to protect the church, to try to defend the authority of the church in this case, against that intrusion of the state in the subject. Secular state has no authority to define, no matter what, on what pretext of liberty, conscience, freedom, whatever, to redefine set order established by God. The laws of marriage stand. They are fully binding between one man and one woman, and in regards to the church, the validity of marriage is established in the canon law we have addressed in previous publications. We don't need to go through all this. And the validity thereof is limited to those who are within the bosom of the church, not some kind of non-Catholic sect or that type of things, because in that case, there's no validity and there's no nuptial blessing or any such thing. And such thing, because they can't give it. People are excommunicating themselves as apostate sectarians. They don't have the authority to have valid marriages, period. And the baptism is presumed as valid. So in this case, but in the case of baptism itself, they have to be conditionally baptized when they come from the Novus Ordo sect and convert. That's the distinction. But under the canon law, it's presumed until otherwise is proven. But still, the question is not really the constraints of the canon law today, as really the authority, non-existent authority of the state, that the state is intruding itself into the matters of that doesn't belong to the state to intrude. And to consider this in a court of law and then impose that decision on the citizens of the state is in itself a sign of tyrannical overreach and tyrannical usurpation of the authority that the court does not possess. And that's why it's so important for us to speak in this way. And that's why it is so important for those who want to be true Catholic to also to reject in conscience and as binding in conscience, obey this our doctrine today and reject these advances of the state in matters of this fundamental laws of marriage. And therefore, we don't need to define it. We can't really say it's defined because it's been defined. So we only asserting what has been already always held by the Church because part of the revealed, divinely revealed Catholic religion, which is that there's only one true marriage, and that can only be between naturally born man, naturally born woman, and not the subversions and perversions and sodomite unions and transgender abominations that are so horrendous that we will not speak of it and the sense. And that should suffice today.